Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. I was about to go for a walk when Mother Nature changed my my direction. It's raining outside, so I decided to go. Recently I was asked to do a video on garden remedies. You know, people work in gardens and they have kind of specific injuries for gardening and homesteading too. And so this could actually be called gardeners and homesteaders natural remedies, but I titled this class Natural Remedies for Garden Warriors Boo-Boos. And there's several things that I would like to cover, and some of the things that we're going to cover, and I'll drop some slides in so you can see, are splinters, bug bites including mosquitoes, ticks, ants, etc., bee stings, stuff like that. Blisters, like blisters on your hands, I'll show you some pictures. Abrasions, cuts and scrapes, achy knees, backache, if you get something in your eye, what to do, how to irrigate it, and then chafing, skin chafing. Some people may think that chafing is really no big deal, but it can be incapacitating and it can be quite dangerous, and so we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is splinters, because that's a very common thing with people who work in gardens. You work with tools that have wooden handles, or maybe you're making grow beds or grow boxes or what have you, and you inadvertently rub your hand across and pick up a splinter. Or for a homesteader, you know, dealing with firewood, I of course recommend wearing a good pair of leather gloves when you're dealing with firewood, but at any rate, these things happen. And so there is a tool that I will show you a picture of in just a minute that I believe every homesteader, every gardener should have, and that's a pair. There's a name brand called Uncle Bill's tick tweezers, I think is what he calls them, but you can get the same thing in a generic for a little bit cheaper, and I do have some available. If you're interested in those, you can contact me at closureforjesus@yahoo.com. I have I don't know, maybe a half dozen pairs available. So I recommend everybody have a pair of tweezers, because if a splinter, you know, has a little piece sticking out and you can easily grab it and pull it out, that's often the best and easiest thing to do. But sometimes it's not that easy and straightforward. I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, have had to take a needle and kind of prick the skin and open the skin up in order to get a splinter out. And you can do that, but I strongly recommend that you at least take a match and, you know, sanitize the end of that needle before you start digging in your skin with it. So you can actually, you know, open up the skin a little and then just sort of squeeze the area if it's on a place that's easy to do that with, a finger or toe or knee or whatever. Knee might be a little bit harder, but at any rate, you can often just express it right out. But sometimes they're a little deeper and it's kind of painful. I have had a splinter so deep that I had to kind of numb the area with some ice before I started digging on it, because it was just too painful. And ice does work if you want to numb, you know, an area with that. But we can also use salves that are drawing, or plants that have properties that would help to draw that out. Plantain is one of them. And I strongly encourage you to get a basic herbal book that you can refer to, because I don't have pictures of all of these herbs. But plantain is fairly common, and it's very drawing in nature. Flaxseed is also very drawing, so you can like make a plantain flaxseed poultice. But if you're out in the garden, you can even just take a plantain leaf and crush it, bruise it up, and, you know, wrap it around that area. Some people have actually used the strings that, if you're not familiar with plantain, it's got very thick strings in it, and you can actually kind of tie those and tie the plantain around your finger. Onion is another thing. You can take a slice of onion and put it on that, and it can help to draw it out. Honey is very drawing, so you can actually, you know, take a Band-Aid and put a drop of honey there on the splinter and put that on overnight, and oftentimes in the morning it will be, you know, it will have moved towards the surface. There's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard of it, that says that the world is held together by duct tape. And I have heard of people taking a strip of duct tape and putting it, you know, if they don't have tweezers or whatever, and sticking it to a splinter and ripping it off, and the duct tape will pull the splinter out, and I'm sure that does work. So those are some things that that I recommend. And here is a picture of the splinter pliers that I recommend. The reason I recommend these is because they're multi-purpose. They're very small. They can fit on a keychain, and they have a hole in them that you could put it right on a key lanyard, and small enough to fit in your pocket. And it's got a special covering on the end. You can see in this next picture that you can actually cover that sharp tip so that it doesn't, you know, poke a hole in your pocket and stick your leg or whatever if you have it in your pocket. So these are very useful, not just for splinters, but also for the next thing that we're going to talk about, and that is ticks. Excuse me. Ticks are not insects, but they're arachnids. They're actually in the same family as spiders. So when a tick gets on a person or a dog or whatever, they crawl and they look for areas of skin that are thin and have a rich capillary bed right at the base. So, and they like warm areas too. So it's really good when you're out of doors and stuff, whether you're hiking or gardening or whatever. It's really good to do tick check every couple hours. Just sort of look over, or even more frequent if you're in an area that tends to be high in tick-borne illnesses, which are no joke. I have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. It typically does not go chronic, but mine did. I've been fighting it for 3 years because the initial treatment was not successful, and we really didn't know 100% what we were dealing with, but we do now, and I think I've just about got it eradicated. So I am very adamant about doing tick checks and making sure that you get those things off of you, because rarely do they come with just one disease. Typically it's a cocktail of diseases. They're called co-infections. So if he comes with Lyme, he may have Babesia or anaplasmosis or something. If it's Rocky Mountain spotted fever, often, you know, they'll also come with, sometimes Rocky Mountain spotted fever can be a co-infection of Lyme disease. So, but not all ticks are infected, so we don't need to just flip out if, you know, if we are bitten by a tick. But I'll show you in just a minute. There's some things that you can do if you do get bitten by a tick and, you know, you have, you know, questionable looking rash or some symptoms or what have you. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But let's go back to the tweezers. Those are actually tick tweezers and not splinter tweezers, but, you know, they work for both. Ticks on their mouth parts, and you can see that, here's how they embed. They actually bury their entire head in the person's skin. It's kind of disgusting when you think about it. But here's what their mouth parts look like. You can see here, these things on the sides, on each side, that look like whiskers. Those are, I forget what they call them, but it's like a shield that comes around their mouth, and when they get ready to bite you, that shield opens up and reveals this barbed mouth part, and they actually bury that barbed mouth part. It's like a barbed tube that they bury into the person's skin so that they can drink blood. They actually have, I forget what it is, but it's some kind of stuff in their saliva that causes blood to pool, and so they can drink it. Actually, ticks only need, I think it's 3 meals in their life to take them from the beginning stages, the nymph stage, or the larva stage, into the nymph, into the adult stage. And if you didn't know, where I used to live in Kentucky, and other areas too, but in Kentucky it's very common to call tick larvae turkey mites. And I had a friend one time that from the knee down on one leg, she had 75 bites, 75 embedded nymphs or larvae of ticks, and those are actually nicknamed turkey mites. And so it's no joke because they're so tiny, you can barely see them. They're almost translucent when they're that small, but they're very difficult to get off. You almost just have to scrape them off with something. and they're very, very hard to remove at that stage. So they need a meal then. They need a meal to go from the nymph stage and then on into the adult stage. And that's really it until they can the female can lay eggs. They're disgusting creatures to me. So when this mouth part goes into the person's skin, it actually, you know, kind of lodges in there. So in order to pull them out, you want to get down as close to the skin as possible and pull straight up. Some people say twist because they screw in. That's not true. Just pull straight up. And that's the best way to try to get the mouth parts out. It's pretty common when people, you know, people kind of freak out with ticks, but like I said, not all of them are infected. But you don't want to take a risk. But don't just, you know, rip it out with your hands. Get the tweezers, get down close, and grab that head down close and pull straight up. And oftentimes you'll go ahead and get, you know, all of the mouth parts. Let's talk about prevention just for a minute. It's the habit of ticks to crawl upward when they land on a host. And so if you tuck in your socks, tuck in your shirt, you know, if you have a loose waistband, you might want to wear a belt to kind of tighten that up just a little bit, because I have had them crawl up and then go down into my socks or something. So, but these are things that you can do that do help. It's very good to wear light colored clothing. That way the ticks are kind of dark. And if you're wearing dark clothing like denim or something, it's much more difficult to see them. But if you wear light colored like khaki pants, if you're a man, or khaki skirt, whatever, it's much easier to see them. And when I go hiking, I wear skirts, and when I go hiking in an area that I know there's going to be a lot of ticks, I definitely cover my legs and tuck my shirt into, if I have pants or sweatpants or whatever I have on under my skirt, I tuck my shirt into that garment, and then I tuck the pant legs of that garment in, because I'm very cautious after what I've been through. So it does take several hours for a tick to be embedded before it actually can transmit disease. You don't want to put anything on it like tea tree oil, or, you know, you've heard of all kind of things, or light a match to it or whatever. That's a good way to get the tick to vomit basically into your skin and put its juices into you. So I don't recommend doing that. Now I looked for some science behind this, and it's mostly anecdotal, that it seems as though people who have a chronic illness tend to attract ticks more. My theory, and the theory of some others on that, is that their ticks and mosquitoes, by the way, which we'll talk about in just a minute, are attracted by carbon dioxide. And so it could be that people that have a chronic illness have more carbon dioxide and less oxygen. I don't really know, but it just kind of does seem like those who have a chronic illness tend to attract more ticks. Now, I had ordered some stuff called cedar sod that I wanted to show you, but it isn't here yet. Hopefully, I'm doing this presentation for a class next week, and hopefully it'll be here for the class. I have heard, excuse me, I've heard a lot of good testimonials about cedar sod, and I ordered the tick formula, and so I'm going to give that a try. And you know, if I remember it, I'll put an update in the comment section below this video and let you know how that works. Right now we're in North Dakota, and tick season is almost at its end, but there are still some out there, so I do still have a chance to test that. Down south where I'm from, ticks are out year-round. You know, here in North Dakota, when it begins to dry up in the summer months, it gets more dry and arid, the ticks, you know, kind of go away, so, which is a blessing. Essential oils are good. Some people have said if you eat a lot of garlic, it can keep ticks away, but just beware the side effect of that is it may keep your friends away too. So if you are bitten and you have an unusual reaction, maybe you start getting a rash, or it's been itchy and sore and maybe a little puffy for several days or whatever, get some wormwood, whether it's tincture, capsules, tea, whatever. Up here in North Dakota, Artemisia absinthium, which is a species of wormwood, grows everywhere. I mean, everywhere. They hate it up here, and I love the stuff. Every time we come up here, I try to harvest as much as I can, if it's, you know, if we're here in the summer or spring. But if you'll take that wormwood for about 2 weeks, take a break of about a week. Wormwood's very tough on the system. Take it for about 2 weeks, take a break, and then take it for 2 weeks more. Again, I'm not prescribing, diagnosing. You do your own research. Of course, if you're pregnant, nursing, whatever, I would avoid that and go another route. But you can also use high-dose vitamin C along with that. And if I were pregnant, if I were nursing, I would probably opt for the high-dose vitamin C, because I know that's not going to be an issue. You can also use usnea tea or tincture for this, again, if you're not pregnant or nursing. Mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, unlike ticks, they insert their mouth part, they get their meal, and they're off. You know, they don't waste time. Like a tick will hang around for sometimes days if it's not detected. The mosquito is not like that, as you know. Mosquitoes actually can be more dangerous than ticks, because they transmit so many diseases. You know, malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika, and encephalitis. And again, as I mentioned earlier, mosquitoes, just like ticks, are attracted by CO2. So again, it seems like some people seem to be bothered more by mosquitoes than other people do. And only the females mosquitoes bite, in case you didn't know that. Okay, prevention and bite treatment. It's good to wear long sleeve, lightweight cotton shirts and something on your legs. That's a really good thing. Although if it's close fitting, they can still bite through that, but it does help. A blend of lavender, lemongrass, citronella, tea tree, and even cedar wood essential oils, and you can put that in a base of like witch hazel or something like that. You can use oils, but that kind of, it can plug up a sprayer and it can stain your clothing. I've never had witch hazel stain my clothing, so that makes a good base to put the essential oils in. And I think that lemongrass and cedarwood essential oils, if I'm not mistaken, are the base for that commercial product that I mentioned earlier called Cedarside. So you might want to try that blend. If you already have the essential oils, it may be cheaper than purchasing Cedarside. Mosquitoes, as you know, probably they breed in water. So anywhere around your house, I'm looking out on a little ditch right now that has been holding water because we've had quite a bit of rain lately. And that ditch is a perfect breeding place for mosquitoes. There's a lot of birds that hang around that because they do eat mosquitoes. And so standing water, if you have garden buckets around the house and you've had a rain and the buckets have water in them, turn those buckets up. It does not take, a foot of water for mosquitoes to breed. So keep that standing water away from your garden and your home. That will help a lot. Check your rain gutters. Make sure that they're draining properly. And then lastly, you can plant mints, any kind of mint, peppermint, spearmint, rosemary, or basil in your gardens, because all of these things help to repel mosquitoes. They're all natural repellents. Now, I know that I specifically want to talk about fire ants because they are so aggressive. And I know that they're not everywhere, at least here in the United States. They came from South America and migrated into my home state of Alabama, and they are ubiquitous in Alabama. The little boogers are everywhere, and they are aggressive. It seems like they're quiet. Everybody says be quiet, and then they march and they just cover your shoes or your legs or whatever, and then they give the signal and they all bite at one time, and then you realize I'm covered with these things. And they can both bite and sting. They have jaws, mandibles that they can grab hold of you with, and it does kind of pinch. And then they can sting you. They have a stinger, and they can sting repeatedly. And it's an alkaloid that they inject that's a derivative of piperidine, which explains the burn. That's like pepper. And so, again, they can sting repeatedly. There's a legend, and I couldn't find any exact research on that, but I've always heard that Native Americans would stake a prisoner out over an anthill to torture them, and that definitely would be torture. People have died from fire ant stings. So bees and wasps typically only sting once. There are some species that can sting more than once, but many of them lose their stinger and die once they've stung you one time. So if you're in a garden, there's probably a plant right around the edge or a weed growing in your garden called plantain. And here I have a picture of it. I didn't have one in the earlier frame where I talked about it, but here's a picture of plantain. And if you didn't know, the seed stalk that's coming up from the plantain there in the center is where psyllium comes from. So you can take a leaf of the plantain, crush it up, and put it on an ant bite, and it will stop the sting almost immediately. In fact, my husband and I were, when we had our farm in Kentucky, our first farm, we had a young neighbor kid that came over. He befriended us. We really loved that little guy. And he would come over and sometimes help us in the garden. We were moving some posts for a grow bed, and there were some ants on that post, and they got all over him and stung him, and he was kind of not happy about that. So I showed him to take some plantain, crush it up, and rub the juice on those stings. He was amazed because it took that sting away right away. And it can help to do the same thing for bee stings as well. Calendula is also effective. Charcoal poultices, and I recommend that, especially if you live in the country, because you're gonna have bees and wasp nests and ant hills and stuff like that. Make up some charcoal poultices ahead of time, and I have a video on how to do that. Make them up, put them in a Ziploc bag, and stick them in the freezer. And then whenever you have an emergency, they're ready, and you can just run grab one out of the freezer and put it on. Having it cold like that helps to reduce the swelling and the pain, and then the charcoal, your skin is going to warm that up fairly rapidly, and then the charcoal is going to start pulling out that poison. Now, if the person is allergic to the bee venom, you can also take some charcoal internally, and I believe I would like to, it would almost be good, if I could say it that way, if I were allergic to bee stings, because I would test it on myself, to take high-dose vitamin C, because I am such a firm believer in high-dose vitamin C. What is high-dose vitamin C? Well, I believe everybody should do a vitamin C flush to find out exactly how much vitamin C their body needs every day. I have a video on that. There's a video that I have called Components of the Detox and the Ascorbate Flush. I talk about the ascorbate flush about halfway through that video, and so I explain how to do it and stuff. But when I say high-dose vitamin C, I'm talking like grams, multiple grams of vitamin C per day. Dr. Andrew Saul one time was coming down with the flu. Everybody in his household had it, and he felt himself getting sick from it. So it's good to take your vitamin C in divided doses throughout the day. And because his body was fighting this thing, he didn't have the flush, or if you take too much vitamin C, you can't overdose on it, because if you take more than you need, your body will eliminate it through the colon. But because he was sick and he was fighting this flu, the man took 100 grams, that's 100,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and one day had no flush, and the next day he was over the flu. So you can see, vitamin C kept my tetanus from running its full course, and I believe the Lord used that to keep me alive. But I've digressed a little bit and gotten on a soapbox, so let me get off of that. Blisters. Blisters are caused, of course, by friction, repeated friction, like, you've probably used a shovel or maybe a hoe or a pickaxe or something before, and you've gotten blisters here on your hand, or maybe you've gone hiking and you've gotten one on the heel of your shoe from that constant friction. Sometimes you'll have the blister and it will go ahead and pop. Sometimes it just rubs the skin off and you don't have the blister. The blister actually kind of protects that a little bit, and if it is blistered, it's best to let that run its course. Some people like to drain that, and that's okay. If you choose to do that, just do it very clean. Sanitize your needle and put something on there to keep infection away. So it's really good to wear gloves when you're out working like that. Take breaks. And keep the skin dry. We'll talk more about the importance of keeping the skin dry in just a little bit. Wear shoes, of course, that fit properly, and keep your socks dry. If you sweat and your socks get wet, you need to go put dry ones on, because you can get a blister. Of course, I talked about not draining the blister and stuff. Here's some remedies for that. If it's on the foot, on the heel or the toe or whatever part of the foot, moleskin is a good remedy in that. What that is it's clear almost, and you can just Google it, what moleskin is, and it's very moist on one side, and it sticks to the skin, and it helps to protect that area and keep it moist. And if you don't have that, you can use the inner skin of an onion and tape that on there, and that's very healing and soothing. Band-aids and tape work, and again, I would put the inner skin of the onion on that. Lavender essential oil is very good. Lavender, if you don't know, is also very good for a burn. Aloe vera is very soothing for blisters and burns. Comfrey poultices, and even a charcoal comfrey. And I have a video on how to make a charcoal comfrey poultice, and that's very healing. Again, here we'll go back to the plantain. That's an excellent remedy for that. And if you think about it, you hear certain plants, certain remedies coming up again and again when we talk about these kind of injuries. So those are things it's very wise to have on hand. A mixture of turmeric powder and honey is a very effective remedy for open blisters, and I've had great success in treating bed sores with a mixture, equal parts of. You kind of just make a thick paste of the turmeric and honey, and then you pack it in a wound. It's very healing, and of course bacteria can't grow in the presence of honey. So, all right, let's talk about abrasions, cuts, and punctures. An abrasion is a more shallow, mostly on the epidermis, and it's typically a shear injury. When you fall on the gravel road and catch yourself with the heel of your hand, like the picture here shows. And then there's cuts. There's many classifications, of course. There's deeper cuts, and there's either cuts from blunt or sharp injury. You always want to make sure with a cut that you don't have a tendon or ligament involved, and know your limitations. If this is something serious like what you see in that picture right there, you really, probably need to have that seen by a professional. A puncture wound can actually be quite dangerous because it can trap bacteria inside, but let's start with abrasions. Often these wounds are very dirty and need to be cleaned very carefully. If they're not cleaned carefully, you can end up with a very serious skin infection that's known as cellulitis, and that's not something to play around with. Herbal infusions can be used to irrigate this. You can use calendula, yarrow, usnea, Oregon grapefruit. There's many different herbs. Plantain is another good one that you can use to irrigate. And then a salve that I make called Boo Boo Balm is extremely effective for these types of wounds. If you want some of that, you can contact me at closureforjesus@yahoo.com. A friend of mine is making the Boo Boo Balm for me right now. And then here again, lavender essential oil is very helpful for these types of wounds. Cuts. It's very good to learn the pressure points to stop bleeding in the event that you have an arterial severance. You've severed an artery. You'll know it if you've severed an artery because the blood will be spurting with each heartbeat from that. And that's one that you really probably should have seen by a professional. But be sure, I recommend that everybody takes a good first aid course, because then you'll learn the pressure points and how to deal with these types of cuts. Again, you can irrigate these wounds with an herbal infusion. Just make a tea basically of whether it's calendula, usnea, Oregon grape, golden seal, whatever, and you can use that to irrigate the wound and wash it out. Very healing. And again, you can look around you. If you're working by yourself and you just don't want to stop, and just look around your area and see, is there some plantain? Is there some yarrow that's growing? Yarrow will stop bleeding. So shepherd's purse is another one that will stop bleeding. Cayenne, I believe everybody should have cayenne. It will stop bleeding. Okay? Alright, let's move on to wound powders. A good wound powder will deal with three things. It will deal with bacteria, keeping bacteria growth down. It will soothe the wound, and it will promote healing. And so you can see on this slide that I have some recommendations for dealing with bacteria, some recommendations for soothing a wound, and also some for healing. Now, you can mix up these powders ahead of time and keep them like in a small Nalgene bottle or something in your first aid kit. And then you can also buy online, or even at some restaurants, they'll have the little packets of honey, and those are excellent to put in a first aid kit. And then you can make, like I mentioned earlier about the turmeric and honey, you can mix these wound powders with a little honey and pack it into a cut and pull the edges close. It will not get infected, and these things really work. I mean, I can't say enough positive about it. So then moving on to puncture wounds, you have to really be careful with these, because comfrey and those cell growth proliferating herbs are contraindicated for these puncture wounds. You don't want to seal it with pine sap or anything like that. Pine sap is another thing that's excellent to use on cuts. If you're out and you have sap that's dripping from a tree, you can use that it will keep infection out and help to seal a wound. Don't use it on any animal bite or scratch or anything, though, because you could get in trouble like I did. So the best way that I have found to treat puncture wounds is with soaking. And you can do hot and cold contrast with charcoal in the hot water, and then to the cold you can use an herbal tea in the hot water. Something that's going to, don't use anything like comfrey again, but you can use something like golden seal or Oregon grape or calendula or usnea tea. Even wormwood, I have read and heard that has some wound healing properties. So any of these, you can use plantain. You can use them to help, draw that infection out. You can make poultices out of clay or charcoal and put on there at night. And plantain is also drawing, that helps to draw out any infection. So that's the best thing that I have found for puncture wounds. These wounds, again, have to heal from the inside out. If you heal the skin first, you can end up with a very serious infection, an abscess or something in there. Alright, let's move on to achy knees. I put under here, don't use WD-40, because my grandfather actually would spray WD-40 on his achy knees. He swore by it. He said it helped him, and so I didn't argue with him, but I don't recommend that. Cabbage poultices are an excellent remedy. You just take the large green leaves, bruise the leaf up with like a wooden spoon, or roll over it a few times with a rolling pin, and then you put that cabbage leaf right on the skin, wrap it around the knee, and then you cover that with like either an old strip of t-shirt or paper towel or dish rag or something like that, and then you can wrap it with saran wrap, or you can wrap it with an ace wrap to keep that in place, and wear that overnight, and it's very soothing. I mean, I've had good success treating achy knees with the cabbage poultice. Charcoal poultices can also help, and again, I have a video on how to make the charcoal poultice. Turmeric and other anti-inflammatories can be very helpful with this, and cayenne salve used topically, but a word of caution, if you do, you can even use tincture. You can even just mix cayenne with some olive oil and rub it on. If you do it that way, if you mix the cayenne with a little olive oil, that's probably pretty safe. But if you use a tincture on the skin of cayenne tincture, that can blister the skin. So you might want to put a layer of olive oil or coconut oil or something on the skin first before you use cayenne, but it's very, very good. DMSO, that stands for dimethyl sulfoxide. I'm hoping to be able to do a video on that substance later, but that's actually a horse liniment, and there's plenty of horse liniments that are great for achy, creaky knees and achy backs and stuff. I mean, they're clean. I get a lot of my stuff from the vet supply store because, I mean, it's cheaper. It's got clean ingredients. I mean, nobody wants to put junk on their animals, and so why not? So I use DMSO. It's actually a carrier, so whatever you mix it with is going straight in through the skin. So if you mix cayenne with DMSO, it's going to go straight into the skin. There's an essential oil. What's the name of that stuff? Deep Blue, I think, is the name of it. I'm a doTERRA dealer, and I don't remember it, but I think it's Deep Blue. And you can put Deep Blue in DMSO, and it's pretty effective. Pre-work stretching. Now that's something that we all know better than we do, but it really does help to loosen up the muscles before you just jump in and start working. So a good stretching routine is very helpful. And then of course on the knees and the lower back, which we'll talk about next, if you're overweight, it's very, very hard on the joints, and so it's very helpful to try to lose some of that excess weight. Backache, again, stretching. Stretching is really key here. Most everything that we do in gardening is forward. We're reaching forward, we're weeding, we're pushing a wheelbarrow, we're hoeing, we're bending over. Everything is forward. And that kind of goofs up the natural curves in our back. So if you're aware of the fact that I have a curve in my neck and I have a curve in my back, and every so often you stop while you're gardening and just, do some backward stretches. Stretch your back, arch your back. This guy here's got his hands there and he's pushing backward. Very, very effective to help, relieve those muscles when you're bending forward so much. Again, many of the remedies that are applicable for the knee are applicable for the backache. You can also use hydrotherapy in the form of fomentations or hot Epsom soaks. You can use the soaks on your knee too. Herbs for pain include wild lettuce, Jamaica dogwood, white willow, valerian, wild yam. There's so many that are good pain medications. And then again, DMSO or horse liniments. There's one called Sore No More, and I forget. I know it has menthol and probably I can't remember what all's in it, but it was pretty clean when I looked at it. It's been a while since I've looked at the ingredients, but I had a friend contact me and she said you need to add that because she fell. She had a very dangerous fall, and she used this Sore No More, and she was anticipating a week of misery, and she said by the next day after using that Sore No More, she was fine. Okay, what about a foreign body in the eye? You're using a weed eater, you're using tillers, we're using other power equipment and stuff in the garden, and stuff flies. And, maybe the wind kicks up and something blows, or a bug flies in the eye. That happens to me. A gnat, will get in my eye. Often you can take a Q-tip and moisten it and kind of twist the end to a point, and you can, if you have somebody with you, can pull the eyelid and actually gently move that out. That's one way you can do it, but sometimes they're more stubborn than that. So I have a recipe here you can see for an eye wash solution. Now you can use herbal eye washes, but all you need is water, just either distilled water or boiled purified water. 2 cups with a teaspoon of salt. If you just use plain water, it can burn the eye, so you want to be sure you add the salt to that. So whenever you irrigate, you can a real easy way to do this is to take an empty water bottle and put your solution in there. Poke a hole in the lid with a knife. Be careful, not to make another casualty. But you can poke a hole in the top, and then that's like a squirt bottle. Always start medially. This is medial, this is lateral, okay? Always start at the inner part of the eye. So you want to tilt the head and start here and irrigate this way to irrigate things out of the eye. Now, if I had time, I would actually demonstrate this, but I think you get the point of irrigating from the inside toward the outside so that you flush it out this way, okay? You really need to know your limitations with this, because if you have something that is going to scratch the cornea. If it's wood chip or something like that, especially if you're sharpening an axe and you've got a metal shaving in there, you really need to go get that seen about, by a professional. Don't mess with your eyes, and always wear eye protection. The last one we're going to talk about is chafing, skin chafing. Women who are large busted, or people who have, a larger abdomen that has a fold. Guys and even ladies under the arms, if you're hoeing and you're constantly doing this, the skin is rubbing on your clothing, skin on skin, and you can end up with very painful irritation called chafing. And that's quite a picture of it there. This one is actually, looks to me like it's starting to go into either a fungal or a cellulitis infection. Moisture from sweating also exacerbates this and makes it much, much worse. So the key here is to keep the skin dry. Our skin needs air. Natural fibers are best, especially in the summertime, cotton or linen. And for socks, I wear wool socks year round. They have thinner versions of wool socks that are good. Cornstarch. For this right here, early on you could have put cornstarch on this to help prevent that. And I would try to get an organic one, non-GMO. Aloe vera is a very soothing remedy for this. And you can mix aloe vera with honey and put it on that, and then put a light dressing on that at night and leave it. It's very healing. Lavender and tea tree oil, lavender essential oil and tea tree oil are also good remedies. If this is not taken care of, again, it can get quite serious. So, don't take these types of things lightly. So as a recap, our final thoughts here. Take a first aid course if you haven't already. Okay, someone's life actually may depend on that. Make a first aid kit and practice. Find a friend or something that's interested in this and practice. Learn basic herbs and learn how to use them. Learn to locate them in nature. Prevention is key. Take time to do things safely. Don't take shortcuts. Don't, often when we're homesteading or gardening, there may be the need to use a ladder. Use caution. Be very careful. Use your head with these things. Gather personal protective equipment now while we can, because we believe that time is coming that we won't be able to get these things. Have your natural anti-inflammatories and pain relievers on hand so that you're ready to go if something happens. And don't take ticks, mosquitoes, and minor cuts or skin abrasions and things like that lightly. Take them seriously and take care of them. So that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you on the next video.